Hi, nice to meet everyone. I mean, most people here, well, some people I'm familiar with, and if not, I hope to become familiar with. So it's great to meet you all. This really is positioned at those people who are looking to start a business here in Alberta. We're going through the basic legal steps. So there's sort of four things that you need to do. It's sort of legally necessary for you to do here in Alberta. And I think personally, these are the easy bits. These are the things that if you give yourself a day and equipped with the information, you can go and do these first four things very, very simply. The second five things are the things that are hopefully going to make you more successful and probably take a lifetime, but definitely things to think about as you start your business. So the great thing about having chat and it being a relatively small group is just feel free at any time to jump in there and discuss or ask questions in the chat. Or if you want the world to hear your voice, feel free to unmute your microphone to do that as well. Be great for me, just so I can get some little bit of context background. Thanks, Matt the Magician, for starting us off here, but just include in there, well, the business you own, what you do, or for some people here, it's going to be the business idea. I am very conscious of the time that we have, and we're sort of at 50 minutes. So what I'm going to do is omit something that I usually don't. So we've got a business link section. If anyone is very interested in the work that Business Link does, they are more than welcome to reach out to me and I can talk to them about all our service. I would just point you in the direction of our website is a great place to start. Our events tab and our newsletter are great places to start. I have 4 slides on this, but today I am going to skip over remarkably quickly. There really is so many things that we do, but I think the website is just a great place to start for that. So I will jump over the about us and straight into the main part of the presentation. So we start with the 4 steps that we need to take. Firstly, we've got to decide on a business name and a business structure. Really, how are we going to organize and operate ourselves and operate this business? It's going to determine our level of liability, how we're taxed, and how we're going to be paid, and the tax that we pay on that income that we make as well. There are a variety of options here. I think, well, we'll address them all, but some in more detail because some are much more common to see amongst small businesses than others. Firstly, and most simply, many people will have heard of this already, is a sole proprietor. We also hear people say sole trader or trade name for this, but this structure really is incredibly cheap, easy, simple to set up. I think to go and do a declaration of trade name form at the registry is $47 or around that. It can even be done online now. There are services like owner.co, OWNR.co, where you can go through that declaration of trade name process on there and set yourself as a sole proprietorship. Very easy when it comes to tax time of doing your taxes. You can just you fill in your standard tax return and there's an extra section which is for self-employed income. But the cons or the disadvantages are there's no limit to your personal liability. So I mean, the thing that people always say is, if the business is to be sued, you are to be sued. It's the same. There's no separate legal thing which is the business. You are the business. The other side of that is there are other ways to limit that liability, not completely remove it, because you don't completely remove that liability, even with incorporation. There are still things that you are personally responsible for. But ways to limit it are through insurance as well. So as much as speaking to an accountant at the start of opening your business and a lawyer at the start of opening your business, have a good relationship with an insurance broker as well, because they can, if you have particular concerns over, okay, I'm a cleaning company and I'm going to be going into people's house and I'm going to work on their carpets and I'm worried that I wreck those carpets. Well, your insurance is likely to provide protection over that if you have appropriate business insurance, liability insurance. So there are ways to manage risk that's within that sole proprietor model. Sometimes it's hard to raise capital. I can't sell shares or a stake in me as my business, and so it's harder to raise capital from investors, and it offers no name protection in and of itself. Although I'm based in Brooks here, if I start Matt Hill Web Design business here in Brooks and I call it the Webmasters Brooks, no one can come along and impersonate me. They can't pretend to be me. I would work with a lawyer at that point and get them to, desist in doing that. Like, there's common law in place there. So although it offers no formal name protection, it's very likely that you don't need formal name protection in lots of the businesses that we see. Just going to look at some of the chat comments here. Sorry, Michael, I said I wouldn't do this, but I am. I've just registered my business, however, working on 3-year course material for over 2 years. It's a business which has risen on the ashes of the pandemic. Yeah, great. Thanks, Matt. I'm sure it's going to be a magical idea. Couldn't avoid that. Okay, and then to set up as I mentioned, set up a sole proprietorship. It is simple and inexpensive. If you want to just trade as your own name, so if Colette Smithers wants to trade as Colette Smithers, that's the name that's on her invoices, things like that. She doesn't need to go and do a declaration of trade name form. She can just be Colette Smithers. It is her. But the second she wants to call herself Colette Smithers Consulting, she's going to need to go and register that trade name. Yeah. I'll give an opportunity to ask any questions about sole proprietorship, partnerships, and corporations just after these next couple of slides. So partnerships, again, it's a relatively simple thing to set up and straightforward. And it's essentially a sole proprietor with 2 or more partners. Again, it can be hard to raise capital, and a limitation here is that with death or disagreement, it ends. You can't sell the partnership. And so just being very, very aware of that. It's less common to see this. Often when we see 2 people going in business together, maybe they have a corporation and they both become owners of that corporation. Setting up partnerships is a very specific legal structure. And with all of these, I would recommend speaking to lawyers and accountants. But with this particularly, if you're entering into someone and having a partnership agreement, I would recommend speaking to a lawyer. But the process is remarkably similar. So next on, and people will have heard of this, is when we incorporate our business.
Hey, Matt, I'm just gonna quickly jump in. As I said I would do. We can postpone this question till a little later if that works, but it's a question. I'm registered as a sole proprietorship and would like to include my daughter, given her age, in order to apply for certain grants. Is this possible? How do I do it? Is this something we want to table later?
I think there's lots to unpack in that question. There's lots to unpack in that question. So that's definitely a discussion I can have with Matt. My headline there is that the question I would want to ask is, I would want to understand which grants we were talking about here, because I'm not sure if I'm fully aware of many of those grants that would be available that are age related. And so I'd sort of want to understand those before you were deciding too much on the structure. So we'll circle back to it, I think.
Sounds maybe like you were just saying an accountant and a lawyer.
Or I would definitely have a conversation with them before they would need to do that, because I think there's just a conversation that needs to happen with a bit more detail.
All right.
My situation is grants, I think at times, or the idea or thought of grants, can be a bit of a distraction to our business. And so building a sound business on a good foundation is sometimes a better approach, or more often a better approach, than perhaps chasing a grant or chasing grant funding. And so we've put here that Matt, she's 29. So there are government loan programs, which you would be eligible for, Futurepreneur, which are for entrepreneurs under the age of 39. And she's an immigrant and she's female. Yeah, I mean, I don't know of any specific grants that are available to those business groups, but we definitely those demographic groups. But there are loan programs, for instance. Yeah, Matt, let's speak. Okay, next one. And so setting up, again, the process is you go to a registry office. There are kits like Incorporate Yourself legalese kits that are available there. Also, I mentioned that owner.co website before. I'm not endorsing it. I'm just saying it's another option for people. And there's a couple of things to be aware of here. Although it's $500 to do the government fee for doing the paperwork there, we can generally expect that if we are running a corporation, we're going to have to, or most people will have to use an accountant, and the cost of accountancy fees for a corporate tax return are higher than that of a personal tax return. So the advantage is we can have a corporation which can be more tax efficient once we hit a certain level, but the cost of running a corporation may offset that tax saving. And so that's a straightforward question for an accountant is, okay, when do you think I will hit that level? And what point should I think about corporation? And for some people, they will always be a sole proprietor. They won't need the complexity. They won't make the tax savings through having a corporation. They're just not the size or scale. And the thing to remember is we can change as well. We can start as a sole proprietor, and as a corporation structure becomes more suitable to us, we can become a corporation as well. Okay, and then so a little bit more about corporation. We have to make sure we do an annual return, and that's done at the registry, and it's used to update shareholders and directors. Even if we are just the sole shareholders, we still need to do an annual return, and there's a cost of about $75 to do that. That's not to be confused with a tax return. Two different things. Thank you, Colette. So there are DIY options, and there's lots of advice online as well. So registering a corporation, just around the naming conventions here. One, you could name it 12345 Alberta Limited. We call it a numbered company, where you get a random number or a sequence number, Alberta Limited. And that business doesn't need to trade as that number. You can trade as, so you would do a declaration of trade name form for whichever business name you wanted to trade as, or you would use an example like this, where you could have a named company, but it does need to follow a naming convention. You couldn't name a limited company that does building supplies, I don't know, fresh taste building. You couldn't call it you couldn't call it fresh or whatever. Like, for a limited company, there is a naming convention, but it doesn't mean that limited company can't then go and trade as a different name. Okay, and so just a sort of a summary of the main business structure, and just to highlight here some of those other approaches that we see people take as well. Now, we don't go in this workshop into too much detail on these, but we see people structure as societies, not-profits, charities. They're just cooperatives or charities, different ways of organizing your enterprise. If there are, this is, before we go on to the next section here, if anyone does have any questions around business structure, now would be the time to ask it. With lots of these, I know it is like, I will often say, yeah, an accountant, or yeah, a lawyer, and I know Colette maybe has a slightly different view, and that's great. But what I would say is that oftentimes people are incorporating to mitigate risk. They don't want to risk their home or whatever it is they are doing. So unless you are very, very confident that you know how to do this and mitigate that risk, unless you're very confident that you can do that and you know how to do that, that's when I would seek professional advice, because you potentially, what you're paying for, you're not really alleviating that worry or that concern that you may have. And quite often for something like this, it's very, very standard for these professionals to do. And particularly if it's a simple structure with like 1 or 2 people, it won't be terribly, terribly expensive either. And I know JMH, who is speaking tomorrow with Sandra, an accountancy firm in Medicine Hat, like they'll have an initial consultation with you. You know, like if you want to ask that question of, should I be a sole proprietor? Should I be a corporation? They'll ask you questions that you will need to answer for yourself. You know, like they'll have that conversation for free with you. So I would, seriously suggest accessing that advice. Colette, when is it the right time to transition from sole proprietor to corporation? Quite often with people, it's a financial position, you know, like, so when they can offset the costs of running the corporation, so when they can make tax savings that would make it worth setting it up as a corporation, that would be the time to do it. And that's going to be different for different businesses. Just the nature of different businesses, it's going to be slightly different, but for most it'll be in that $50,000 to $100,000 mark, you know, like I think that tends to be a point at which people do tend to transition. Thank you, Colette. Okay, and step 2, we have to make sure that we understand the government regulations relevant to our business. Obviously, it's Canada, so it's not just one government. We have municipal government, provincial government, federal government that we have to be aware of and make sure that our service offering meets the standards set by those. It's mandatory, so it's not just, oh, well, we can choose to, like, complying by these regulations. It's the law. So we need to make sure, 1, we're aware of them. Ignorance is no defense. And a great resource to be able to do that is the bizpal.ca website. And you go in and answer some questions about your operation, the type of business that you're running, and it will literally list all the regulations that might be relevant to you. And that's the one downside of the website. They might be relevant to you. So if you are a landscape gardener, for instance, it's going to come up with all the regulations around disposal of hazardous waste, because it might be relevant to you. So it takes some time to go through, but you will find, if there is a regulation relevant to you, you will find on that bizpal.ca website. Andrew says, what's the best incorporation when you have a business partner, and can they both be directors and a shareholder? Absolutely. So what's the best incorporation? So to set up your share structure, I would certainly recommend that you speak to a lawyer about that. So if you're having business partners, you can't be a genuine sole proprietor. You could set up a partnership agreement, and you can both operate as sole proprietors. But it would be I would definitely speak to a lawyer on that specific question. My business is international oriented. How does it affect my taxes? More or less a brokerage business. So we have a section later on about taxes specifically, and I will be able to speak to, it will come up later. And if you have a more specific question, I can definitely answer that. Thank you for the questions. And so 1, is being aware of the regulations that may be for our business. 2 is being aware of the municipal regulations. So these tend to be around the property that we're operating the business out of. And so they're focused on things like land use. For lots of the people here, I'm assuming that we're going to be operating from home. So you're going to need some type of home-based business license. In Medicine Hat, I'm not sure if they have minor home occupation or major home occupation. My guess is they probably do. And a minor home occupation is when from the street, there's no visible business activity goes on. So if I am the web designer and all my clients are all over Canada and I'm sitting in my basement in my computer, no one would know that I'm running the business from there. And that tends to be a very, very simple process to get a home-based business essentially a development permit for my home-based business. If I've got a little bit more activity going on, let's say I'm running an e-commerce store where I'm having deliveries twice a week, or let's say I have an occasional visitor to my a business acquaintance coming to my home and having meetings in my home, people fall into a major home occupation. And that's when there's more of a process, and the development permit process can take a little time. So if you are thinking of that's the type of business I'm going to run, I would have the conversation with the City of Medicine Hat or your local municipality ahead of time to make sure that you're ready and set up for that. And often they hinge on things like parking and whether you're allowed signs at your location, things like that. So that's where the municipality comes in to play. And then obviously provincial regulations. These are particular industries that are heavily provincially regulated. So if I want to do anything in alcohol or cannabis or gambling, there are those. But then we've got provincial regulation around employment standards and food handling. Lots of food businesses, home-based food business, or businesses that are operating a small-scale food business. It's going to be Alberta Health who they sort of come into contact with most. But if you want to know what's specific to your business, you definitely want to make sure that you use that BizPal as a guide. Thanks, Lisa, for sharing the licensing requirements for Medicine Hat there. And then federal regulations tend to be on things that we would say, consumer goods, mass consumer goods, and they tend to be on people's health and safety, things like that, or on cross-border. So for instance, if I'll use an example of someone I know, they were trying to bring in go-karts to use at their entertainment leisure facility, and obviously they hadn't done their sort of due diligence. They were bringing these in from China, and it was the Canada Border Agency said these do not meet our safety standards here. So quite often those federally regulated, if you're bringing products into the country, you're going to meet those federal regulations. Okay, and then step 3, I have this as a separate business license because there's always lots of questions here. Oh, and I should have updated my example from Calgary, is that municipal business license issue. So if you are a Medicine Hat business doing business exclusively in Medicine Hat, you really only need a Medicine Hat business license. But let's say you're the Medicine Hat locksmith who goes and changes locks in Brooks. The expectation is that you would have a City of Brooks business license too. And any other municipality you carry out business in. I know that some of the counties in and around, so for instance, the county of Newell around Brooks doesn't have business licenses. And so some municipalities don't have business licenses, but it is definitely worth checking out because they can be costly. If you're not from that municipality and you want to get a business license for a different municipality, it can be costly to do that. So definitely make sure you're aware. Cypress County doesn't either. Yeah, it tends to be those more rural municipalities don't require business licenses. And I mean, essentially there's an amount of protectionism there. Colette Smithers, can you get a regional license or is it by municipality? So not in Southeast Alberta. I think it'd be something that would be awesome. They have it in Southwest Alberta. So like Pincher Creek and Lethbridge County. If I have a Pincher Creek business license, I can go and do business in the county, which I think is a step forward. And I think but I also understand why we have municipal business licenses. I noticed in the City of Brooks that today they've removed the need for business licenses for Brooks businesses. But if you are visiting Brooks, if you're an out of town business, you do need a business license. So interesting there. Lisa can probably speak to this. Sorry to put you on the spot, Lisa. So if I am a Medicine Hat business going and doing work in Redcliffe, I'm expected to have a business license, Redcliffe business license, hey?
Correct. Yeah, and I just posted the link for that. But that's a great suggestion and idea in terms of regional licensing. I'd be curious if our municipalities would work together on that.
I know, because it's still, I understand why they do it, and it's a certain amount of protectionism, but you know, Amazon aren't getting City of Brooks business licenses. You know what I mean? Like these businesses who are delivering thousands of dollars of stuff to City of Brooks and City of Medicine aren't. So yeah, maybe we should push for it. Okay, and so step 4, and this is relevant to the question that we had before, Hendrix, just about the tax obligations that we're going to have. So I think most people know this. When we do $30,000 in revenue, that becomes a point in which we're obliged to collect and remit GST. Great way to think about that is that's never our money. We're just acting really as the tax collector. So we collect the 5% and we remit the 5%. And obviously, if we've had any purchases with GST ourselves, we get to claim that back. At that point, and possibly before, if you have employees, you're going to have to get a business number. And getting a business number is something that you'll get from the GST. Sorry, from the GST, from the CRA. And then, I mean, I can provide a little bit more detail on that. You have a business number, and then you have accounts with the various CRA entities. So for example, you'll have your common business number, and then you'll have an extra part of that, which will be for your GST or your payroll deductions or your import export. So that's when it comes. So you are likely, if you're doing import export as a business, you're going to need to register for a business number prior to hitting that $30,000 business license. Sorry, that $30,000 GST level. So it's, yeah, so being set up in the right way with the CRA. But if you're a very, very small business doing under $30,000 in revenue, let's say you're a farmer's market business, or you're doing, you know, making gift bags and selling them online, things like that, you really, in terms of tax, your obligation is to report the income that you made at the end of the year. And that's it. Like, you don't have to do anything necessarily more than that. Just be aware of that. I'm just going to let some people in here. Okay. Yeah, so any questions on that in terms of tax? I know that's a race through there, but often there's questions around GST. I mean, it's something to be aware of, that if you think you are going to get to that level, plan for it in advance. And some businesses from day one, they decide that they want to be seen as being the size of business that charges GST, that their, you know, customers expect it, and they just decide from day one that it's in their interest to register for GST. Yeah, there are potential downsides of doing that, because once you register for that first year, you can't choose to or not. You know, like, once you register, you have to collect it and you have to remit it. Even if you just do $5,000 in revenue, you have to do it. And choose the interval that works for you. So you don't want to be stuck with doing this every month if you're just not making that much revenue and you are able to manage your finances. So you can do like an annual, you can remit it on an annual basis. So choose the time. Don't give yourselves lots of admin to do if you can manage those finances in a way. Excellent. But I know Drew's coming in to speak about tax tomorrow, so I'm sure he'll be able to help with that. I'm just going to skip, in fact, the diagram, because I just think it perhaps shows what I've just said, what I was just about to say there. So with tax and structure, if we're a sole proprietorship, we pay personal income tax, and we still have to collect GST if we're over that $30,000 mark. With a corporation, we pay personal income tax on the money that we pay ourselves. Obviously, we still pay GST. And also our corporation will pay corporate income tax, but that level is lower than our personal income tax level. So that's when that efficiency can come in. If you're setting up your structure to be more tax efficient, we don't pay as much. Corporate income tax is not as high as personal income tax. Yeah. Okay. So those are the things, the legal steps that we need to take to ensure that we're set up in the way that we should be, and around licensing, around making sure that our business structure is set, and those things. These things I think are much more important, much more significant for people, but sometimes we overlook, and people tend to be like, oh, I'm really, really pleased. I can show the certificate that I'm incorporated, or that I've got my City of Medicine Hat business license and I'm now a business. But really, these are the most significant things for me. And they're understanding that you are providing some unique value to the market. You're just not another business. And the second that you fall into that trap of being another business is when you're going to have to compete on price. You know, if you are just the next carpet cleaner in town, you have only one thing to do, and that's compete on price, and probably you're going to have to be cheaper than those other providers there. So you have to really understand what is your unique value proposition, what makes you stand out from the competition, or what makes the competition irrelevant to you. You know, like what's not necessarily, what makes you stand out from that competition. And I think it often or should come down to this: what problem do you solve for them? How do you make your customers' lives better? Business owners have to think about their businesses as being customer centric. What do I do for my customers? Yeah, we all want to run our own business. We all want to be our own boss. But that won't sustain us in the long term. What will sustain us if we consistently meet the needs of our customers, if we make their lives better and solve their problems for them. It's awesome running a business. It's awesome calling ourselves an entrepreneur, but how do we make other people's lives better? And there are lots of examples, and you know, like this being one clear one of a value proposition of a new type of email, and it's a paid for email inbox. And they just basically said, okay, email sucks. People don't enjoy using their email. It doesn't work for lots of people. It feels messy. It feels like a job when I go to it. So they just reinvented how that inbox looks for people. And I think it's $99 a year to sign up for. And they just say it's a better way of doing email. They haven't just created another Gmail. Obviously, it's going to be impossible to then compete. They've looked at solving those problems some customers have. And I think that's a key differentiator there. You can't be for everyone. As a small business, you can't be for the whole of Medicine Hat. I can't think of any small businesses really that will serve every single person in Medicine Hat. They all have such different needs. Like, let's leave that to, you know, government waste collection or city rec services. You have to be much more focused on your people, your tribe, community, whatever you want to call them, and how you solve their problems specifically. And so, yeah, like I always put this, you know, like this, of all the points, this is the starting point. This is one we should revisit. This is one we should check in on. If we don't have that unique value proposition, we're just another provider. And I just don't think that we have, it's the thing that will sustain our business for sure. Okay, so step 2, we need to have some form of business plan. And this varies from business to business. I don't think for everyone this needs to be like the 50-page formal business plan that we would show to investors, that we would take to the bank. I think it needs to act as being purposeful for you. And so for some people, it's going to be a roadmap, a series of action steps. Like if I speak to a business and they're a dog walking business, like, do they need this huge business plan that they're not going to be looking for investment, but they need to have a plan as to the steps they need to take in order to be successful. So I'm not saying don't do a business plan. I'm saying do one that matches your need. And these are some of the basic ones, really, you know, some of the reasons we would do it. So one obviously is a roadmap for ourselves, for our success. For some people, it's going to be for funders or for external investors. Maybe if we are thinking about making a grant application or an application for a loan, they're going to expect a very, very rigorous business plan. Like quite often when I have an inquiry about, can you tell me the grants that are available for I say to them first, like, can you send me your business license? Because your business plan. Because if that business plan's done, no one's going to give you free money without a very, very strong, robust business plan. It's a great way to test the feasibility of an idea. Does it work? It gets us. The great thing about it is I think it forces us to ask those difficult questions. I know when I started my business, like financials, just not my strong point. Like, I loved the marketing side of it. I loved the customer service part of it. Doing the rigorous work on my price, like things as basic as my pricing strategy and understanding what my costs of goods sold were definitely not my strength. So being forced to sit down and go through that process, it tested, well, I can have the best marketing in the world, but if I can't profitably deliver my service, I don't have a business. So it can get us to ask those more challenging questions at times. And, back to having an action plan. It's great thinking about a business, it's great planning a business, but really we need to have action steps if it's going to become a reality. And other traditional business plan, these are the components that we would expect to see, some of which don't need much explanation. But I know that market research is definitely something we can help with as an organization. And it's an area of weakness that we see in plan after plan after plan. And I would say marketing and sales strategy as well. People know their operations, mostly because lots of small business owners have done what they're doing for maybe someone else, or they have experience, or they've witnessed lots of people doing, you've witnessed lots of restaurants running and operating. But what work have they done at being able to understand and plan for how am I going to get people in the door? How am I going to get people to make a call to me? And what does my market need? How do I know that it needs that? So those are key areas that I do often see weakness in. Business Link have just launched a business plan builder for anyone who is looking to create something that's much more formal, but still needs the support of a strategist and someone to work with. You can access that through our website. And it's good because it recognizes the points where people often find challenge and it directs you to someone directly. So market research, it connects you with our market research team, or marketing, it directs you to a member of the marketing team. So it's a good resource, the business plan builder. Okay, and then maybe steps before looking at creating a more formal business plan are things like the business model canvas. Lisa, what are your thoughts between a formal business plan and the business model canvas? Yeah, I think that the business model canvas is the place to start. That if you are unable to articulate the value proposition that you have, which doing a business model canvas will force you to do, if you're unable to identify that, I think you could waste quite a bit of time writing that formal business plan. So if you need a formal business plan, you need a formal business plan. Like, you go into TD with a business model canvas and they look at you like, what the heck is this? But I think it's a step on the way, for sure. And that's definitely where I would start. And that's where I start with like one-to-one consultations all the time. I'll have a conversation with someone and their idea will be here and it'll be here and it'll be here. And they think they need this information and they think they need to write this big business plan. And I'll say, let's work on the business model canvas. It's a great starting point. Yeah. And so, yeah, various ways to do it. And at some point for people who are in a startup phase, they may just need something that's actually more of a project plan. Like it's okay, I've got my business model canvas. I understand my value proposition. I understand what makes me unique. How do I make this happen? Like if I want to get selling at the farmer's market by May next year, what do I need to do to make that happen? Cool, 15 minutes left. I think we're good. And yeah, this, for those who aren't familiar with this is the business model canvas. I know Colette's taken this workshop before and various other people have, but it just helps get your whole business idea onto a single page, and it helps you interrogate that idea, that business idea. And it really acts as a great starting point to ask yourself market research questions as well. Okay, so success step 3 is doing that market research. So like if we do a business model canvas, or even if we do a business plan without market research, like it's just based on our hunch and our estimation and what we think might be the case, which is great. Like that's a really legitimate starting point. Where else would we start? Like I think, let's say, I think Medicine Hat really needs a new, I don't know, trying to think of the business off the top of my head, environmentally friendly carpet cleaning business. Like that's my thing. Like that's what I think that Medicine Hat needs. Like that comes from somewhere. Like that comes from me speaking to people from Medicine Hat, or just me seeing this in different communities. But unless I do that market research, like how do I know that's the truth? And so that's obviously going to take two forms. One is speaking to people directly and trying to understand their motivations, how do they get their carpet cleaned currently, what do they pay, what, like all understanding their needs, what don't they like about the service, all of those things. And I can use things like Google reviews of carpet cleaning businesses in Medicine Hat, like all those 3-star reviews that say, oh, it was a good service, but ... Like we can learn from those. So that's potential market research to do. Obviously, there's gathered data, there's industry information out there on target market, on competition, like business lists, on size of market. There's lots and lots of information out there. We have access to some of that, like we have industry reports, which you can always come to us for, but also there's lots of this information out there for free. Like the Stats Canada website really is a mine of information for if you want to find out industry size or how competitive a certain market is. The Alberta Economic Regional Dashboard, another great resource if you want to know demographic information, how many people in Medicine Hat are obese, like that data is on there, or overweight, like you can find out that information. And if you're struggling with any of that, definitely reach out, because we can often connect you or find that information for you. So a great thing to do. And the primary market research, that is the speaking to people. And it's the thing that sometimes we feel a bit more awkward about. We're not sure about. It means that we're going to have to get away from our computers and go and speak to people. Well, I'll say two things on that. One, we can do some of that on our computers. Like we can run surveys, and we can get into Facebook groups that have our target market in them. Or we can look at, like I say, looking at online reviews of our competitors, all those things we can do. But I think for most businesses, it will come to a point where you got to go and speak to those people. I always say this, I think, in every presentation, but the sort of quickest way to make money is to find out what people want by asking them, build it, and then just sell it to them. Like, I know it sounds very, very straightforward, but if we don't do that first thing of really finding out what people want through our primary market research, how are we going to build that thing for them? And so, we got a very practical thing here. I know Magic Mike, not Magic Mike, that's a stripper on that movie. Matt the Magician is his business is about math hacks, math books for grades 3 to 5. So obviously we expect a huge part of his product preparation is going to be speaking to potential customers, consumers, about his product. He's going to be sharing it with them. He's going to do initial work of just speaking to them and their parents, because remember, like, it's, I suppose, the person paying the money. Ultimately, my son's not picking math books, I am. When doing primary market research, how do you know they are telling the truth? Everybody says that's a good idea, don't they? Yeah, that's it's so good. And I was reading yesterday, Tim, about this, because I gave a longer market research presentation yesterday. And really, we don't want to ask that. Like, do you like my thing? Because people will, people want to be nice and don't want to let you down. But really what we're trying to do is understand the customer and understand their current pain points, the things that they don't enjoy about the current service or the current offering. Like, I suppose the most famous one is if Henry Ford was asked his customers, what do you want? They would have all said faster horses, because they wouldn't have had that concept of the better solution necessarily. And so so yeah, we don't necessarily ask them, do you want this? We observe them, we look at their behavior, and then we're going to make some assumptions based on that. I mean, that's one part of it. For some of it, we will do some direct testing. Like for the math books, for instance, we might send out these math books and ask them to be sent back to us in a month's time and see, well, were certain activities done, were certain activities overlooked, or we may run a focus group with a group of kids and we observe them using our math books. So there are ways of getting that information, but yeah, we're probably like best practice in primary market research is not going to be necessarily, do you want an eco-friendly carpet cleaning business? You know, like we're probably going to look for other things. We might ask them, you know, what they like about their current carpet cleaner, what they don't like, and hope to learn from that. Thanks, Tim. And I suppose step 4, and again, when we talk about weaknesses we see in business plans, this is something I often see. At times I've seen like 3 or 4 pages, literally, on why a business is using the name it plans to use. So, you know, Tasty Creations, why every reason why that they've chosen that name, but they completely fail to identify clearly their startup costs. And so these are just 4 of many thoughts that we should be having around financing, around our financial plan. Like for startup businesses, be sure of your startup costs. Like it does frustrate me at times when I get like, say, insurance, approximately $1,100. Because it's a bit of a guess and it's a statistic I found online about new businesses in my sector. Like go and speak to an insurance broker and find out exactly how much that insurance will be. So your startup costs, that's everything that you need before you sell your first thing, before you open the door for the first time. So, you know, that they're going to be your accountancy fees, your lawyer's fees, your cost of registration, things like that. Maybe often there's costs associated to setting up your location for the first time. I've got some of these on here. You're likely to need to have insurance in place before you're operating. So anything that you need before you sell your first thing or you provide your first service, you're opening inventory for your store. So all of those, there's nothing on there really that we can't, with doing the research, we can't be certain about. So be certain about it. And back to this. So you're going to have some sort of funding plan. So once you've identified your startup costs and you've done your cash flow forecast. So how's my cash going to flow for the first year? What revenue do I expect at certain times? And what are my expenses going to be to provide my service or provide my product? So creating cash flow forecast. The hardest part of all of this is, well, what's my revenue going to be? Like, how do I even guess that? Because I can't go, well, the average therapist in Alberta earns $150,000 a year, therefore I will. Like there are problems and it's a bit, it varies via industry, varies depending on industry, but you are going to make some guesses, some best guesses, you're going to do some research, but yeah, there will always be an unknown on that revenue element. But if you, let's say, we can provide data on like, what's the average marketing spend in your industry? If the average marketing spend in your industry is 7% of revenue, and you plan to spend 1% of revenue on marketing, well, you probably can't expect average revenue for your industry. You know, like you probably have to expect that will be lower, for instance. So I completely understand revenue is the most challenging to get to grips with. Look at projections of, okay, well, if I was busy completely to capacity, if I've got a pizza shop, if every table was filled for every service, how busy would I be? How much revenue would I make? And then maybe take a middle of the road, and then maybe take okay, what's the worst case scenario? What's the level that would just keep me in business? And does that seem to look likely? Could you potentially make that level of revenue? So yeah, it's the revenue is always a challenge. Okay, we've identified those costs that we should plan for. And then, I mean, back to one of the questions before about sources of funding, and this always comes up, you know, like, where are the grants, where's the money? And I think that it's important to know that for most people starting small businesses, this is the source, these are the sources of startup funds. It's coming from our savings, it's coming from our personal line of credit, we're adding it onto our mortgage, it's coming from family, it's coming to friends. Grant doesn't live in Alberta. Yeah. And yeah, so it's coming from that pot, that pool is the truth. There are some people, and oftentimes some people start here, but as they maybe become more established and they've got a proven track record, they can look to investors or loans, commercial banks, things like that, things that are, it's an external body taking, you know, trusting you in the success of your business, but they're going to likely want to see some experience, you know, some, they need to be able to get their money back, so they're going to want to understand that, how you've been so far. And then obviously grants available, there are things, but again, startup businesses, even the Medicine Hat grant programs there, which I just think are sort of province leading in how they've been and how that's been distributed and how that's been done. They're not for they're not for brand new startups, you know, like you would have had to have been in operation before this. Anyone can unmute if I'm wrong in that, but on the whole, governments, you know, they've got this money, they have to place that money where they think they'll have the greatest impact. And I've got to be honest, if I was making that funding decision, I would be giving that funding to a business that has 1,000 employees already, or 100 employees already, that has a proven track record of success. I wouldn't necessarily be giving it to the really nice guy who wants to open a downtown bakery, because I'd have that limited amount of funds and I've got to deliver for Alberta. So yeah, you know, like it's a little political, but I think that's why we don't see lots of funds go directly to very small businesses. I'm aware that we've got 2 minutes left, Michael. And that's good because we're pretty much getting towards the end. A couple of just points on this financial plan. One, when we're very small, we might be tempted to go, well, I'll run the business through my personal bank account. I just don't think it's great practice. There's nothing legally that's a problem with doing that, but it's likely that you'll get yourself in a bit of a mess or a bit of a muddle. So having a separate bank account, if you aren't great with this, have that conversation with a bookkeeper, at least to get you set up and get you organized. And then you maybe can manage some of this yourself. Understand that taxes will always have to be paid. The CRA always gets paid first. And so keeping that money aside, you will have to pay it. Please don't get into trouble, particularly with GST. Lots of businesses do. They fall into that thing of, well, it's in my bank account, therefore it's mine. Like, it's never yours. And the final one, success step, is really recognizing that you don't have all these skills. No one does. I don't have the skill to speak in a minute. You don't have all these skills. And so you're going to either have to acquire them, and it's you know, like you might have to do some training or learn something and go on YouTube and understand how to do a cash flow forecast or attend a webinar like this. Or you may have to go, okay, well, I will never have that. I can't do that. And you might have to hire that skill out, but that's part of your business. That's part of operating a business. It's not going to cost you $0 to get started. Yeah, and I mean, these are questions which I said there, and I'll share this with Michael so he can then share it on, because I know that I've jumped over some of the information here, and there are some links that are better explored by individuals. Perfect. Thanks, Lisa, for sharing those funding search tools. She's right. Yeah, there's that database there. ISED database is really good. Yeah, perfect. And there's my contact details. So I'm matt@businesslink.ca. But you can, yeah, feel free to reach out to me, and you're well supported in Medicine Hat as well. Like, I know Pat does lots of work with entrepreneurs in Medicine Hat. Sandra is awesome as well. So yeah, feel free to reach out to anyone.